My sister always acted like the peacekeeper, but she was the one whispering poison into everyone's ears. When I finally confronted her with proof of the lies she spread about me for a decade, she didn't apologize, she panicked. Because her entire identity depended on being the victim. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was 12 years old, standing in the middle of our living room while my parents argued about money. My sister, 2 years older, stepped between them with her calm voice and gentle hands, telling them to breathe, telling them not to fight in front of us. Everyone praised her for being mature, for keeping the peace. But when the shouting stopped and the room quieted, she leaned close to me and whispered, "You always make things worse. If you weren't so careless, they wouldn't fight." Her words stung, but she smiled sweetly afterward as if she had just given me advice. That was the first crack I noticed in her mask. The moment I realized her role as the peacekeeper wasn't as pure as everyone believed. As the years went on, she perfected her act. In front of the family, she was the calm mediator, the one who smoothed over arguments, the one who hugged people after disagreements. But behind closed doors, she whispered poison. I didn't know the details at first, only that people's attitudes toward me shifted after her private talks. A cousin who used to laugh with me suddenly treated me with suspicion. An aunt who once praised me for being responsible began questioning every choice I made. I remember one summer barbecue when I overheard her speaking to our uncle in hushed tones. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard my name followed by phrases like, "too reckless," and "always causing trouble." When I walked over, she smiled at me, her voice suddenly cheerful, asking if I wanted more lemonade. My uncle's eyes, however, carried a new doubt. Her sabotage wasn't loud or obvious. It was subtle, carefully planted. At school events, she would make small comments that seemed harmless but carried hidden barbs. "She tries hard, but she's not really responsible," she'd say with a laugh, leaving me embarrassed while she looked innocent. At birthdays, she'd joke about me forgetting things, exaggerating small mistakes until they sounded like flaws. Everyone laughed, thinking it was harmless teasing, but I felt the sting every time. One incident still burns in my memory. During a family holiday dinner, I shared a story about helping a friend with a project. My sister interrupted, smiling, and said, "That's surprising, you usually give up halfway." The room erupted in laughter and I forced a smile, but inside I felt humiliated. She looked at me with that same sweet expression as if she hadn't meant any harm. But I knew better. Over the years, her influence grew. Relatives trusted her, believing she was the voice of reason. She was the one they turned to when conflicts arose, the one they praised for her maturity. Meanwhile, I was painted as reckless, selfish, or unreliable, all because of her carefully crafted lies. I began questioning myself. Was I really the problem? Was I truly careless, irresponsible, unworthy of trust? Her manipulation was so subtle that it made me doubt my own worth. I tried to ignore the unease building inside, but it followed me everywhere. There were moments when I almost confronted her, but she always managed to twist the situation. Once, after a cousin accused me of being unreliable, I asked where they had heard that. They hesitated, then admitted my sister had mentioned it. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "I was just worried about you. I didn't mean anything bad." Her tone was gentle, her eyes wide with innocence, and I felt guilty for accusing her. Another time, during a school play, she told a group of friends that I had forgotten my lines in rehearsal, even though it wasn't true. When I performed perfectly, she clapped the loudest, acting proud, while the others looked at me with skepticism. It was as if she wanted me to succeed just enough to keep her mask intact, but never enough to escape the shadow she cast. The worst part was how she managed to convince everyone that she was the victim whenever tension arose. If I tried to call her out, she would cry, saying she was only trying to help, that I was being cruel to her. Relatives rushed to comfort her, leaving me standing alone, painted as the aggressor. I remember one family trip when she told our parents I had lost the tickets, even though she had them in her bag the whole time. When I insisted I hadn't, she burst into tears, saying I was blaming her unfairly. My parents scolded me for being irresponsible, and she sat quietly, clutching the tickets, her face hidden behind a mask of sorrow. These small incidents piled up over the years, each one chipping away at my confidence. I began to withdraw, speaking less at gatherings, avoiding situations where she could twist my words. But even in silence, she found ways to paint me as the problem. Her manipulation was so subtle, so carefully woven, that it became part of the family's fabric. She was the peacekeeper, the victim, the one who held everyone together. And I was the reckless one, the selfish one, the unreliable one. But deep down I knew the truth. I had seen the cracks in her mask, the whispers behind closed doors, the subtle sabotage. I knew her peacekeeping was nothing more than a performance, a role she played to hide the poison she spread. And though I doubted myself, though I questioned my worth, a part of me held on to the knowledge that one day the mask would slip. One day the truth would come out. For now I carried the weight of her lies, the sting of her barbs, the humiliation of her sabotage. But I also carried the memory of that first moment. The whisper in the living room, the smile that followed, the crack in the mask. It was the beginning of a long journey, one that would test me, break me, and eventually lead me to the truth. The memory of her whisper in the living room stayed with me for years. But as I grew older, those whispers became harder to ignore. They weren't just isolated comments anymore. They were patterns. I started noticing how relatives repeated the same phrases, the same criticisms almost word for word. She's careless. She never thinks things through. She always causes trouble. None of them had seen me do anything to justify those judgments, yet they spoke with certainty. And every time I could trace the origin back to her. It was like watching a play where she wrote the script and everyone else performed their lines. I began listening more carefully, not just to what people said but how they said it. The tone, the timing, the choice of words, it all carried her fingerprints. That was when suspicion hardened into determination. I knew she was the source and I knew I had to prove it. One afternoon I caught her in the act. I had walked into the hallway during a family gathering, and there she was, speaking to our cousin in hushed tones. She forgot to pay the bill again, my sister said, her voice dripping with false concern. I worry about her. She's so irresponsible. The truth was, I hadn't forgotten anything. It had been a minor delay, nothing worth mentioning. But she twisted it into a dramatic tale, painting me as reckless. She didn't see me standing there listening. I stayed quiet, storing the moment as proof. That incident lit a fire in me. I realized I couldn't rely on memory alone. I needed evidence. So I started gathering it piece by piece. I saved text messages where she exaggerated small mistakes and sent them to relatives. I recorded conversations where she spoke about me with that same false concern. I even asked friends directly, and some admitted she had warned them against me. She said, "You're too selfish," one friend confessed, looking guilty. I didn't believe her at first, but she sounded so convincing. Each confession was another brick in the wall of truth I was building. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I felt like a detective in my own family, piecing together fragments of lies. But the more I collected, the clearer the picture became. She wasn't just spreading rumors. She was constructing an identity for me, one that didn't belong to me at all. I remember one particularly painful moment when I overheard her speaking to my aunt. "She always ruins things," she said softly. "I try to help, but she doesn't listen." My aunt nodded, her face filled with sympathy, not for me but for her. That was the moment I realized my sister had positioned herself as the victim, the one who suffered because of me. It wasn't just about making me look bad. It was about making herself look good. The more I uncovered, the more determined I became to confront her. But I knew I couldn't rush it. If I accused her without proof, she would cry, play the victim, and everyone would believe her. I had seen it happen too many times. So I prepared carefully. I organized the evidence, saved the recordings, and planned the confrontation. I wanted undeniable proof, something she couldn't twist or deny. I waited for the right moment. A family gathering was coming up, a birthday dinner where everyone would be present. It was the perfect stage. I imagined the scene over and over, rehearsing my words, steadying my resolve. I wasn't just confronting her, I was exposing years of lies. When the night arrived, I carried the evidence with me, tucked safely in my bag. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. I watched her throughout the evening, smiling, laughing, playing her role as the peacekeeper. She hugged relatives, offered kind words, and looked every bit the victim she had crafted herself to be. Finally I stood. The room quieted, eyes turning toward me. My sister looked up, her smile faltering. "I need to say something," I began, my voice firm but calm. "Something that's been hidden for too long." I pulled out my phone, opened the recordings, and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, whispering lies, twisting stories, painting me as reckless. Gasps echoed, forks froze midair, and my sister's face drained of color. "That's not all," I continued, laying out the messages, the confessions, the evidence I had gathered. Each piece landed like a hammer, shattering the image she had built. She tried to laugh, the sound hollow. "You're overreacting," she said, forcing a grin. "I was just protecting you. You're too trusting. I didn't mean any harm." But her words fell flat. No one laughed with her. No one nodded in agreement. The cracks in her identity were showing and everyone could see them. Her grin twisted into panic. "You don't understand," she snapped, her voice rising. "I was protecting you. They would have hurt you. I kept you safe." I met her gaze, unflinching. "No. You weren't protecting me. You were poisoning them against me. You weren't keeping me safe. You were keeping me small." The room remained silent, but the weight of truth hung heavy. Relatives looked at her with disappointment, some with disbelief. My aunt, the one she had convinced so thoroughly, shook her head. "I trusted you," she whispered. "All this time I trusted you." My sister's face hardened, but her mask had slipped. The peacekeeper, the victim, the gentle mediator, it was all gone. What remained was the truth, a manipulator caught in her own web. And for the first time I felt the power shift. The silence after I finished speaking was heavy, almost suffocating. My sister sat frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to gather herself. For years she had worn the mask of the peacekeeper, the gentle victim, the one who suffered because of me. But now, with the evidence laid bare, that mask was cracking. Her unraveling began slowly. At first she tried to laugh, brushing off the recordings and messages as misunderstandings. "You're twisting this," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. "I was only trying to protect you. You're attacking me unfairly." She looked around the table, searching for sympathy, waiting for someone to nod, to comfort her. But no one did. The relatives who once trusted her sat in stunned silence. My aunt, who had always defended her, pressed her lips together, her eyes filled with disappointment. My uncle leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. Even my grandmother, who had adored her, looked at her with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. "You lied to us," my cousin finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words was crushing. "You made us believe things about her that weren't true. You turned us against her." My sister's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, I didn't mean," she began, but her voice faltered. She tried to cling to her role as the victim, insisting she was misunderstood, that I was cruel for exposing her. But the room had shifted. The sympathy she had relied on for years was gone. Her panic grew as more relatives questioned her. "Why would you say those things?" my aunt asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you make us doubt her?" My sister's hands shook as she reached for her glass of water, her fingers slipping against the rim. "I was protecting her," she repeated, her voice breaking. "She doesn't see it, but she makes mistakes. I was just trying to help." But no one believed her anymore. The disappointment in the room was heavy, pressing down on her carefully built image. She had spent years weaving lies, positioning herself as the peacekeeper, the victim, the one who held the family together. Now that image was unraveling thread by thread. The aftermath was swift. Friends who had once admired her distanced themselves, unwilling to be caught in her web of manipulation. Family members stopped confiding in her, realizing how deeply she had twisted their trust. She was left isolated, her peacekeeper mask gone, replaced by the truth of her poisonous whispers. I watched her struggle, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. For the first time she looked small, fragile, not because she was a victim but because her lies had collapsed around her. And for the first time in years I felt free. Her lies no longer defined me. I reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and my place in the family without her shadow looming over me. That night as I walked home, the cool air brushed against my skin, carrying with it a sense of renewal. I thought about revenge, about how exposing her had been my way of striking back. But as the stars glimmered above, I realized it was more than revenge. It was liberation. I had broken free from the cage she built around me. The lesson was clear. I promised myself I would never let anyone, not even family, dictate my identity again. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartbreak, but it had led me here, to freedom, to resolution, to the promise of a life lived on my own terms. And for the first time I truly believed in that promise.